I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. Obviously, we have a short period of time. So most of what we'll be covering is, more sort of general stuff more than anything else. But I essentially just wanted to kind of point out some key things that you might want to keep in mind when it comes to business school admissions. And once I finish it, we'll have some time for some Q&A from you guys. I don't know if you guys have the same sort of interface as mine, but there's a little chat sort of thing on the side that you can just type in your questions. All right, so one of the first things you may be asking as a finance person is whether you feel an MBA is worth it. And that might be something you might continue to wonder even after you submit the application or even after you've gotten your acceptance letters. I've had clients in the past who have had doubts even after getting their acceptance letters and within 5 minutes realizing how much it really costs. And obviously they knew beforehand, but I guess it's, when the reality hits and, you look at your bank account and how much of that has to go to the school, there's certainly, it certainly casts a lot of doubt. So if you ever feel on the fence about going to business school, it's probably because it's a luxury and not a necessity in your situation. Unlike, somebody from engineering or somebody with no business background thinking about an MBA where, an MBA probably is going to be much more transformational in terms of the educational experience. So for many of you guys, an MBA can be worth it, but not necessarily for the reasons you may think. As many of you, if you look at if you do a LinkedIn search for, current students at HBS and Stanford, whether they're bankers or consultants or whatever, you'll see that most of them don't really need it, right? They have the pedigree, they have the work experience. Even if they wanted to switch careers, they could probably do it without needing an MBA. So why do these people go? For the most part, it's not really about the jobs. The jobs obviously is an important thing, but a big part of it's basically a sabbatical. And so, you're basically buying into a support network, a lifelong board of directors, so to speak, in terms of giving you career advice. I found personally as well, like as you get older, you're in positions where you are the boss. You don't have colleagues in the workplace to commiserate with or to lean on in terms of getting advice about whether you should stay at the job or not, move elsewhere, so on and so forth. And the friends that you make in business school are invaluable that way because they're kind of in the same boat as you. But at the same time, they're scattered all over the world in different industries and are able to really kind of give you a lot more candid sort of advice and support that, your colleagues in your industry may not be able to. So you want to think about it, an MBA is sort of like, it's like buying a membership into a private club with the education as a Trojan horse. So it is a luxury, and whether that's worth it to you or not, obviously, is a subjective thing. One of the ways to figure that out is to visit a few schools. You don't necessarily have to visit schools that are, that you're actually applying to. For example, let's say you're based in New York. You might be looking at applying at Kellogg, Stanford, or somewhere, on the West Coast. That doesn't mean you have to go visit those schools. You can probably visit NYU and Columbia and Wharton, even if you're not applying to those schools, because once you visit some of these top schools, you'll get a much better sense for the kinds of people that go, get a sense for the, the environment and the culture and whether you want to spend $200,000 and 2 years of your life, pursuing this kind of thing. In terms of the sweet spot as well, it's basically about, for most finance people, it's roughly 3 to 5 years after college. That's sort of that's sort of the best time to go for a lot of finance people. And conversely, that's when adcoms sort of are more willing to admit you guys. Once you get past 5 years, it becomes a much harder sell from their perspective. And also, frankly, I think for a lot of you guys that are, say 5, 6 years out of school, chances are you probably are already in a post-MBA position, and it's probably not as worth it as it would be if you were a little, less experienced. In terms of, what schools to target, obviously, for most banker private equity guys, it is top 8 or bust, with maybe 1 or 2 top schools in this top 16. That's what most people do. I generally agree with that. I don't think it's necessarily worth it to go beyond the top 8 for the most part, especially if you're already in private equity or on the buy side. In terms of the tiers of schools, just to kind of give you a brief overview, in case you don't know already, obviously you've seen a lot of rankings here and there. Things jump change from year to year. But if you consolidate most of the rankings over the time, you'll see that there's basically two tiers. There's the top 8 schools and top 16 schools, which I've listed over there: HBS, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, Sloan, Booth, Columbia, Tuck, and for Europe, LBS and INSEAD. This is sort of the top 8 schools that I think most finance people tend to target. The top 16 schools are Haas, Ross, Duke, Darden, Stern, Cornell, Yale, UCLA. A lot of these schools typically are not schools that you would see a lot of traditional bankers targeting, unless there's some sort of personal reason, like they just want to go somewhere local because of family reasons or so on and so forth. Okay, so one of the things, while admissions is holistic in that they look at the entirety of your profile, the reality is the easiest way for a lot of them to filter people out is with your numbers, especially for folks in finance, because many of you guys went to similar schools, had strong grades and GMATs, and you have relatively similar profiles in terms of work and school and so on and so forth. So unlike other candidates, there's very little margin for error here. Yes, low numbers can keep you out, but high scores won't get you in. That applies to most applicants, but I think for folks like yourself who are in a feeder group, there really is no wiggle room. Lower numbers really are fatal. I've seen it more often than not. But with that said, there's a threshold as well, right? Once you hit a certain threshold, there's the diminishing marginal benefit beyond a certain threshold. For GPAs, it's typically 3.5 plus, and you're good. 3.2-ish if you're in engineering. AdComs are well aware that engineering grades on a much harsher curve. So, they're a bit more forgiving in that respect. For HBS and Stanford, it is 3.7 plus, which starts to get into law med school territory. Again, this doesn't mean that, if you're like a 3.4 or something, you're going to be, knocked out. But you do want to get as close to the averages for the GPAs as much as you can, especially given that you're up against a lot of other finance people who will have strong grades. With that said, beyond sort of building an alternate transcript, if your grades are really bad, such as, you've failed a bunch of courses, academic probation, and you need to take 2 or 3 online extension courses to kind of make up for it, there's not really much you can do in that respect in terms of, changing your GPA, short of getting a time machine. But the one thing that is within your control is your GMAT. The GMAT really is by far the most important metric that can make or break your application. Again, it is the most important metric. A lot of people hate to hear that. I don't personally like it, but it's just the reality. That's really how AdComs tend to sort people out. It doesn't mean that if you have a low GMAT, you're automatically shut out, but your odds are long. Again, there's a threshold as well. Most schools have about a 720 average. That's what you want to shoot for. Ideally, a 740 plus with a balanced quant verbal. But I mean, if you're going to shoot for 740, chances are you'll need a balanced quant verbal anyways. Anything under 700 for you guys in finance is likely going to be, it's going to make your odds really, really long, no matter how you cut it. I get a lot of questions about retaking. You want to retake as much as you can. I mean, obviously, there's a certain limit, right? I mean, once you get past 4 or 5 times, it's probably enough. Yes, AdComs don't necessarily like people retaking it too many times, but it's about the lesser of 2 evils, right? You're better off having a 740 on a 4th retake than sticking with a 680 on a 3rd retake. So again, GMAT. It is by far the most important thing. Make sure it is in range. For those of you that went to a non-US school, your GPA is essentially, I wouldn't say it's irrelevant. They'll take a look at your transcript, but you don't have to worry and fuss about converting your GPA into a US, 4.0 scale and freaking out because it looks bad. For you guys outside the US or that went to a non-US school, it's really about your school pedigree and your GMAT. So again, GMAT, doesn't matter who you are. SC asks, is business school worth going if you don't get into a top 8 or top 16 school? That just depends on who you are. Depends on your profile. To make it easy, without knowing your background, it's hard to say. What I do find is that most people who already went to a target school in undergrad, or they went to a solid school, they have a solid resume, they worked at, top tier firms, it's probably not worth it. I mean, if you're sort of a more of a standard issue banking plus buy side person, it's probably not worth going outside of a top 16 school, to be honest, right? I mean, if you want to go back to school, it's probably better just to wait a couple of years, go get an executive MBA or do a part-time program or just not do one at all. Because again, as I said before, it's not to knock the education because you do learn something, but what you learn really isn't something that you can't learn on your own, right? Just buying books from Amazon or whatever. I mean, a lot of, accounting is accounting. What you learn at Harvard, in terms of accounting is not going to be any different than picking up a textbook on accounting, right? Or marketing or any of these business school subjects. Again, it's basically buying a membership into a private club more than anything else. And so, is it worth paying that huge membership fee to a club that is not something that will be worth much to you? That's something you want to ask. Joe asks again, if you had a bad GPA, what approach would you take? Build an alternate don't apply for an MSF. Basically, just build an alternate transcript. There's tons of online extension courses now, offered by accredited universities like UCLA. You can, take those classes, get them over with, do 2 to 3 classes in calculus, algebra, whatever. Freshman course is fine. You don't have to do any, upper level courses. Ace them, show that you're not a dummy and that your low GPA was due to lack of effort, not lack of grades.